Grace, mercy, and peace in the
Amen.
name of God the Father, through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Amen. Hallelujah. Thank you.
How long approximately do I have? Just so I know. I don't want to go over.
11:40,
11:45? Yeah. I guess where I'll start is this really isn't about me. It really is about the grace of God. I was not anything great, and even today, apart from the grace of God, I'm nothing great. When I started out, I was really a testimony to all that is wrong with our public school system and the growing secularization in this country. I was not brought up in a Christian home. The home where I was brought up, it was broken by the age of 6. I grew up in foster homes, was sexually promiscuous by the age of 11, drug addicted by the age of 14, didn't have any respect for life, wound up in the juvenile justice system by 14. I was really quite screwed up. When you go through quite a number of foster homes, and when you don't believe in God, and you don't believe there's anything but here, when you believe you evolved from a monkey, you basically attach that much value to human life. When I was 14, I was pretty maladjusted. I didn't fit in with any children, didn't fit in with adults. Most people thought I was nuts, and in actual fact I was. When I was 14 and in a foster home, I was being abused, so the first one I ran away from. The second one was not abusive, but you find it's kind of amazing how they talk about, Christians, and we kind of did the best we could with residential schools. We probably weren't perfect. But I know of Aboriginals myself who were saved. They never talk about the dirt in these atheist foster homes and in these gay foster homes. And, the place where I was at, they just didn't care about you. And they'd eat steak in front of you, and you'd have like a little, little thing of stew. And, when you're like a 14-year-old kid, this isn't too great. And so when I ran away, I tried to steal a car and wound up in the detention center, and I actually found there it was kind of nice. They gave you chocolate milk, they gave you carpeted floors. My standard of living went up by committing criminal activity. And when you don't have a moral compass, and it doesn't really bother you if you hurt people, you just do what you got to do to make your life better and be darned with any victims or carnage that you leave behind. So when I was in my next foster home after I got out, and it was pretty bad too, I committed some very serious crimes. I tried to shoot up a police station and actually tried to shoot the secretary inside the police station. It was with a high-powered slingshot with a scope. It was actually a very dangerous weapon and .30 caliber hunting shots. Even when the police car came by, I shot at that. And in my twisted world, when I wound up in the newspaper for that, I thought I actually attained success. And that's really sad when that's what you think is success, rather than graduating from school or having a successful marriage or, pastoring a church, real success. For me, success was being a loser. And sadly, I didn't learn anything for 7 years. I spent 7 years in the system, going through different institutions. For me, success was actually getting kicked out of medium security. And by the time I was 19, I tried to run a bus into the wall of the London, Ontario police station. Once again, very serious crimes, taking hostages. And I was only 19. Even though I was a very dangerous person, I wasn't that tough. And when they put me into maximum security, it was very, very scary. And somehow, as scary as that was, and as much suffering as there was there, and there was tremendous suffering, most of it self-inflicted, somehow I thought that was success. When you're getting rejected from institutions, when you're getting rejected from foster homes, when social workers who are trained allegedly to try to fix you, when they reject you and you're so far gone that you think that is success, that was a very sad thing, and that's where I was at. Now, thankfully for me, when I was in Millbrook, even in maximum security, I wound up in a couple fights with inmates. And it wasn't usually me who started those. A lot of it was self-defense because I was younger and smaller and whatnot. One guy hit with a rock in the sock, and then out of fear, I actually wrote a death threat in my own blood and gave it to a guard. And I knew that wasn't going to, that the guard's life wasn't in danger, and he probably knew it too. They brought a goon squad to my cell and extracted me, and I slashed myself with a knife and that. So at that point, At that point, I actually was at the bottom of even the maximum security. They put me in an asbestos baby doll. They wouldn't give me a mattress. I actually stole a little cup when I was in my cell. I don't remember. I think I got it when my door opened up for a shower or something. It was just sitting there, and I got it. And I stuck it in my toilet and just kept flushing my toilet until all the water was overflowing. And then it was even flowing into the other inmates' cells, and they started yelling. They were pretty mad. When you're like 23 hours and 45 minutes locked up, you get a lot of time on your hands to do creative things. And, I didn't have anything else to cause trouble with because I didn't have my clothes, I didn't have a blanket, they were just leaving me on concrete. So I got this little cup and managed on doing this. I had stitches because of cutting myself. Anyways, there was this one Anglican minister, and he was quite evangelical and conservative. The Anglican Church in Canada today has some problems. Many of them don't believe in the authority of Scripture. They're blessing homosexual unions. But this one Anglican, he was a pretty evangelical guy, and he was saved. He was an ex-alcoholic, and the Lord touched him and delivered him. He looked at me in my messed up state. He would come to visit me once a week. And he said, "Bill, even though you look like that, I still love you, and God still loves you." Amen. And the one thing back in those days, I don't know about now, because Christianity is increasingly being discriminated against, even in the correctional service. The one thing I was allowed to have was a Bible. So even though I would howl like a dog in my cell, even though I would flood other inmates' cell, even though I tried to assault inmates if I could, this one inmate was calling me names and didn't think I'd get at him because we're locked up, and then one day my cell opened up and his opened up, and right in front of a guard I attacked him, and then the guards threw me back in. In spite of all that, I would still put my Bible underneath my little baby doll. That's what they're called, the asbestos, because you don't have a pillow. And I would just kind of lay on it, and I would read it. And even though on the outward I was still looking pretty messed up, like here I am, not even fit to be in a regular maximum security unit. They're keeping me segregated from these inmates. Still, God was working at me. And there was psychological damage because you are locked up all that time. There was a lot of anger and frustration, with that long solitary confinement. It was 6 months solid. Still, God was working on me in there. And eventually, when I got released, the Lord did do a few things. Now, at first, you'd like to say that God just miraculously touches you and changes you, and that is maybe the story for some people. For me, that wasn't. It was maybe going a couple steps forward and then 3 steps back, and then God would pick you up and maybe put you 3 steps forward. And that is kind of how it was. The Anglican did have a lot of an influence on me, and I should even go back before there. God did touch me before I even wound up in jail. One time, this one girl, she mentioned a suicide attempt. I was an atheist, and I once on 25 hits of LSD tried to go over a bridge, and it was 2 in the morning, so the odds of really being saved was next to nil. And even in that psychotic state, I kind of had a sense that if I went over, I was going to be separated from God. And a police officer just happened to drive up on the bridge and got me by my collar and pulled me back and took me to a psychiatric hospital. And because of this overdose, I was psychotic and covered in blood from fighting in a park earlier than that. At that point, I kind of said I was going to try to find God. And I didn't know where he was, and I didn't know really even how to find him. But it's kind of interesting. There's a verse in Acts, I think it's Acts 4 or 5, where it says to the Greeks, even though you don't know God, he's not very far away, if you know the verse. Yeah, and that was kind of where it was at. I didn't know how to find him. I was lost. I actually tried to hitchhike before winding up in jail. And interestingly, God, like hitchhiking, hoping to find God somewhere, not really knowing where. I just, I was homeless. I was sleeping outside. I'd wind up in a Salvation Army church one week, maybe another week of Pentecostal church. I wasn't saved at this point, but I was searching. And God in his mercy would bring Christian truckers and sometimes Christian, just regular drivers, and they'd have Christian music on. And so I kind of had an idea that Christianity was where it was at after I heard the gospel a couple times. And so I did cry out to God in a graveyard. And actually, that's the name of my book. Jadrinka has a few of them, Born in a Graveyard. That is where I was born again. And that is where God touched me. and where I came to a knowledge of Jesus Christ. Now, unfortunately, I had no catechism, so that's how I wound up in jail with these very serious crimes. But God then brought this Anglican, and he would minister the gospel to me, and also sort of, the love of Christ. And I saw these people had what I didn't have, so that kind of made me hungry for that. So now when I got out of Millbrook after 15 months, I was in a maximum security prison, and, like our system would like to fix you. The government would like to fix you. They give you a psychiatrist. Sometimes these psychiatrists are more whacked out than you are. And I don't say that facetiously. Eventually, and I'll get to the better part of my testimony, I eventually became a psychiatric nurse, and God really did some amazing things for me. Now, at this stage, I had no social skills, no job skills, was homeless. And the system, and its idea of fixing me was, put me on some medication when I was in this segregation unit, and literally went from segregation right out the door to the men's mission. So pretty much a recipe for disaster, and really the government can't do better. People who look to the government to fix you, you're always going to be let down. I promise you that. That's why I think Christianity lends itself to less government, because it should be the church. Yes. It should be families. Right. When you get social workers at $25 an hour, half of whom are feminists and lesbians, they can't fix you because they're not fixed, and they don't care enough to fix you, and they can't if they did care. And so, I was just a product of the system. When you're not working out for them, they kind of spit you out. Now, when I wound up on the streets, for 2 days I tried to go straight. I thought, I got to go straight. And my idea back in those days was find a common law girlfriend, get a nice white house with a picket fence. But I had no idea how to get a job to even get this stuff, right? And most people aren't into homeless guys that are sitting in a park. So, so there I was for 2 days just feeding squirrels. And going back to the men's mission, and eventually you do what comes natural. I knew a few guys were out of jail, and I just found them and looked them up and started doing drugs, and the white picket fence never came. I was just, drug abuse, and pretty soon I was back in jail again. Very, very interesting. I was so drunk and so messed up with this guy that I knew from jail, and he was a complete loser, and for whatever reason, he brought these two men that were like 30 some odd years old, 10 years older than us, just covered in tattoos and muscles. And they invited them to his house where I was. And, these guys didn't take us seriously, and rightfully so, and they just showed up to rob us. So when they robbed us, they also kicked me in the face, and I was like drunk. And so once again, I had a huge gash here, and they left with their beer and whatnot. And then I wound up unconscious. This guy left me there. And then when I woke up, and keep in mind, I was sort of making some effort to go straight. Well, for whatever reason, because I was robbed and I had no money, I thought I had to go get money. And so I walked out of this guy's room and decided to rob police cars, not knowing there were police cars. And this was at the London police station. And I don't know to this day how I did it. I wound up in the news again. I got into the London police station parking lot, and they actually leave their cars unlocked. So here I am, covered in blood, with some kind of, I don't know, tank top, just didn't look good. And you'd think the cops would ask, what are you doing in our parking lot? And I'm opening up the doors of the cop cars, and I brought the pillowcase from this pillow that was on the bed. It was like covered with blood from my eye. And I actually got some badges and some wallets and some flashlights. And I actually made it through, I found out from the news, 16 cruisers, just one from another. And I do remember vaguely cop cars driving back and forth, and I would just lay on the front seat of the car until the one passed. And I actually got out of their parking lot and was walking down the street, and I guess some cops did notice me, so before you knew it, there was like 4 cruisers like following me. And they were doing circles around me, and in my vague haze, I thought, I wonder if I can still pull this off. And then they drove up to me and asked what's in the bag, and of course they find their wallets and their badges. So I wound up back in jail again. It was like only 3 weeks. And some of the cops would come down and go, "You stole my wallet." And it's like, "Oh, sorry, man." Like, I was like, that wasn't a whole lot of success. Now, our system, being what it is, actually let me out on bail. And I don't know why. I had no fixed address, no job, no good reason to be let out, but Canada being what it is, they let me out. And then I was trying to, I was out on bail and I was trying to go get high again, and this Baptist drove by. And his name was Laurie Bunch, and he became very much a key figure in bringing me out of that life and into where I am today. He actually just saw me walking down the street. He didn't know me from a hole in the ground, but he is sort of what a Christian should be. He had his wife and his kids in his station wagon, and he just asked, did I want to join him for a chicken roast? And of course, I got nowhere to go except to get stoned, and I don't have any friends. So I said, yeah, sure, why not? And they actually drove me to a farm. They killed a chicken, which was kind of brutal, but I'm an animal eaters rights activist anyways. So, they killed the chicken in front of me, and, they ate it. It was like really fresh chicken. And they shared Christ with me. So I started going to their church, which was Ambassador Baptist Church. And from there, I got a real taste of Christianity, of people loving you unconditionally, people doing honest work, which was something I didn't really have much of a concept of yet. Now, even though all those good things were happening, I did pull away from it. And I did run away a little bit more. And one day, I was at this place called Hebron Farms. Even the courts were trying to give me a little bit of a break. They're going to leave me there. But I did run away. Now, even though I ran away, I had that taste, right? And I wasn't enjoying my sin anymore. So, I went hitchhiking across the country again, tried to do things my own way, wound up in jail again, and quite amazingly, another Pentecostal pastor would come. He'd bring the Pentecostal testimony. That was the Regina Correctional Center. When I finally got out of there, I stayed out for exactly 3 more weeks. I actually called this Christian ministry, Teen Challenge, said, I want to go there. On my way there, being who I am, and like I said at the beginning, this isn't about me because I'm not much of a success. I thought, I don't want to give my life to Teen Challenge. I want to do it my own way and maybe, go on welfare and have nice friends who I've never had because you don't have friends when you're on welfare and doing drugs. And I wound up in jail one more time at the 3rd week. And this time I wasn't even trying to steal nothing. I was just sleeping outside. I had a knife for self-defense, wasn't using it. And this transit security pulled it out and they had me charged with weapons again. Now at that point I actually cried in the Don jail. It was one of those rare times I cried and said, Lord, I'm a loser. This is ridiculous. And I did start reading the Bible, and in some ways I did start changing. Now God had to work one more humbling experience on me to really, really humble me. And that happened about a week into the Don jail. It's a very, very violent jail. I think they closed it now, but it was one of the most violent. And in the time that I was there was like 7 assaults in 3 weeks. And so, I was kind of trying to act tough, even though I wasn't all that tough. Like, I did handle myself in fights, but I wasn't Mr. Heavy by any means. And I was just walking by this one cell, and this guy inside was a little bit cranky and told me to go move elsewhere. Now, of course, when you got your prison attitude, it's like, you better shut your mouth, and that's what I told him. Because I kind of looked in the cell, and I thought I was bigger than him. And also, prison being what it is, this bastion of morality, there was this homosexual who liked me. His name was Dennis. And he now decided to try to mediate, because he was hoping to keep me on the range. I was like 21 years old. He's a pervert. Now, I wasn't interested in him, but that didn't matter to him. So he tried to say, Bill, you don't really want to fight with that guy. And I says, really? He says, yeah, that guy, he'll leave you alone if you leave him alone. And so I thought that guy was scared of me because I'm an idiot and wasn't getting the vibes. And so I said really loud, well, if that guy knows what's good for him, he just better shut his mouth and stay out of my way. Well, now this guy didn't want to give me mercy anymore inside the cell, and I wasn't smart enough to see that. And Dennis thought, well, I'm not going to get this guy. This guy's on his way to the hospital. So he looked at me really sad and went his way. And me, I'm like kind of just walking back and forth, really proud of myself, thinking that I did something. Well, it came my turn for my lockup. So I went in my cell, and then this guy came out and came to my cell, and his face was red. And he was probably about 240 pounds, solid muscles. I was all of 180 pounds. For whatever reason, his cell, when it looked dark, he looked kind of small. And he says, when your lockup is done, you're meeting me in the bathroom at the end of the range. And I'm looking at him thinking, he's bigger than me. And then Dennis, that sodomite, came by and says, Bill, he's Golden Gloves boxer, and he's on his way to doing 10 years for manslaughter. So then I thought, yeah, this is way out of my range. And the only thing I could do was pray, and I did pray. And I said, God, this was really stupid what I got myself into, which it was, because this is a Golden Gloves boxer, 60 pounds bigger than me, who's really, really mad at me because I told him to shut his mouth and stay in his place. And I'm like a 180-pound, 21-year-old punk. And he doesn't like this. And I prayed for the whole hour, because you had 1 hour lockup, right? And I'm just praying, and I don't want my cell to open. And I'm saying, Lord, I just don't want the cell to open. And then I was thinking, Lord, I gotta go to protective custody for myself, and then I'm saying, God, I'm really sorry for being this stupid. And this guy is at the back, and they actually have like a workout bag for punching. Like, there's a lot of boxers actually in jail. And this guy put on the gloves and was hitting the bag, and you could hear it even though it's on the other side. He is working himself up for me, and everybody's looking at me coming by my cell, and I'm a nobody, So anyways, my cell does open. Like, they have little buttons, and they don't care, the guards. When it's your 1 hour, they hit the button, and your cell opens. And so I'm thinking to run to the guard, and then I'm looking at him, and he's actually over there with gloves, looking at me, going like this. Really, really mad. And there's like 30 inmates on this range looking at me. And I do believe it was God, because when you pray fervently, like sometimes, at least in my life, like I'll pray and not much happens, it's a half-hearted prayer. Well, when you got this guy wanting to hammer you, it's a fervent prayer. And I'm saying, Lord, please help me, please help me. And I actually walked towards him. And I was walking like this, Lord, please help me. Literally like this. Not looking tough. And he's there, and all the inmates go into a circle around you because they want to see you get slaughtered. And thankfully, for whatever reason, and I do think it might have been the grace of God working on this guy, even though he wasn't saved, he wasn't an intrinsically bad guy once you found him. Like, I know, he did kill a guy, and he's going to do 10 years. And a lot of people are mixed bags. And once you got to know this guy, he had one or two decent qualities, but that's a whole nother story. He just looked at me, and I was so insignificant to him. He just goes, well, you want to fight? And I looked at him, I said, no, not really. And, God had to humble me. And he goes, why not? And I said, you're going to slaughter me. Which, was very humbling to say this in front of 30 inmates. And in fact, in some ways, that's usually suicidal, because there's a pack mentality. When you're weak, everybody jumps on you, kind of like lions with a deer. They just don't show it a lot of mercy. And then the guy goes, Bill, I know you're scared. And he put his arm around me with a boxing glove and kind of did a little like this. And he says, I kind of admire you that you even came here. I expected you to run to PC. And I says, yeah, well, I'm sorry for shooting off my mouth like that. And that was a very changed moment at my point, because there was no point in trying to prove anything to these guys. I said I was a nothing to all of them. And at that point, I started memorizing scripture on that range, like openly, and sharing the gospel openly, and reading the Bible. And I wasn't trying to be tough anymore. And even though there were 7 assaults in 3 weeks, quite amazingly, I got out of that completely unscathed. And that was the end of my criminal activity. When I got out of jail, I really still had no idea what to do or where to go, and I was still homeless. But I resolved I wasn't going to steal anymore. And it was a miracle. I believe it was a miracle, because I still didn't know how to get a job, and God had to teach me that. And I still had to get a fixed address. And I was flat broke, but I says, Lord, I'm not going to steal. Please help me. And I actually stood in front of the Toronto Greyhound bus station, and I just started asking for change. Now, normally, and I advise that you don't, normally I don't give change to like able-bodied guys. Every once in a while, I think God puts it on my heart and I give a little bit, but generally registered Christian ministries are far better. And, I got a couple. LifeSite News is one for me, because I'm very much into pro-life now. But back in those days, I just asked for change, and I think God put it on everyone's heart. Like, people were just throwing it at me. And I literally got like $100 in an hour, which is unknown. And the last person to give me change was this Christian lady by the name of Joanne. She gave me $10 and a card and said, I got a job for you. Now, I was going to be seeing my family, and they were in Vancouver, and I found my way out there, but they were like doing drugs, and I wasn't enjoying it. So I came back, and I looked her up. And it wasn't much of a job. It was just delivering business cards. And then, because, now I am trying to look for work, John Howard Society, a thing that helps out inmates, they actually got me this demolition job. And so here I am now in this hostel, and actually meeting, are some of you guys Trinidadian by chance? Or most of you from India? Well, there's a lot of people of Indian heritage from Trinidad, right? And I met a bunch of these types of guys, and I was bringing them to church, at Stone Church. So I was going to church now every Sunday, and meeting Christian friends. And praise God, one Christian actually opened up their home to me because they saw him working, and they knew I was homeless, but they also saw I was working and bringing people, and God was just using me in a major way. And this was a Pentecostal church. Its name was Stone Church. So that was where I kind of entered the mainstream, you could say. This is where I had to learn some social skills. Eventually I gave up that demolition job. Welfare had this little thing, and that was kind of sad. I had to give up my job to go on welfare to get to school. That was the only way I could get this healthcare aid certificate. So I actually, out of 70 people that applied to that, I got it, which was kind of amazing, because here I am, like this prison record a mile long, and nowadays, you got like a 10-year-old shoplifting, you can't get that kind of a job unless you get a pardon. And I was far from being pardoned. I was like out for a few months. But, I actually got a healthcare aid job. And then from there, I actually got my first really good job. It was at Confederation Life. And I was completely unqualified for it. It was like kind of job where you need a 2-year business diploma and, maybe some clerical experience. It was with Confederation Life working in their computer center. This was 1989. So I think I was actually straight for about 1 year. From prison and homelessness, and here I am in this kind of a white-collar job. It was like the Lord just told me to apply for it, and I actually had the interview, and the assistant manager, I remember she looked at my resume, which had like healthcare aid, and then, I had to kind of say clean toilets when I was in jail or whatever, to kind of make up for 4.5 years. And she said, I don't have a reason to hire you. And all I remember was my mouth popping, bop, 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 bop. And she just kind of shook her head, and I thought, well, that wasn't God, that was just me. And I went home. And when I got home, they phoned and says, Bill, we'd like to congratulate you. You got this job. And keep in mind, in 1989, for a relatively unskilled guy, this was $12 an hour, which translates to today would be like about $22 an hour. And I don't got any skills for this job. And that job is what actually got me into my nursing, because I actually got really, I was making good money. I had to learn a few more things. Like one time, like when you're homeless, in order to stay warm and comfortable, you sometimes put some cardboard on the sidewalk, and you kind of sit there. Well, when I had a lunch break, I kind of noticed a good stairwell, and I put some cardboard under there, and some of my coworkers in their suits and ties were looking, and they called security, and they said, why is our new production services clerk underneath our stairwell? And they phoned me, they called me in the office, this guy Gerard Gay, who was actually from the UK, way up in the insurance industry, probably $300,000-400,000 a year type guy. And he goes, Bill, why were you napping under our stairwell on cardboard? And I kind of explained to him, well, when you're living outside, you get cardboard. And he goes, well, you don't really do that here. And thankfully, they never fired me. And they had a hard time with me because I wasn't learning basic things. I knew nothing about computer coding. Like I said, I don't know why they hired me. And for 4 months, I was on the verge of being fired, and I was even praying to be fired. This guy, Pastor what the heck was his name? Pastor Hatch. He was street evangelist. He says, well, Bill, I think God put you there myself, and the only way you should go is if you do your best and get fired, or you just stay, unless God gives you a better job. Well, I wasn't getting the best job and a better job. I was trying, but I was praying to get fired because it was just so stressful. And, I was sending policy of payments off to people who were deceased because I couldn't read the coding, and they were getting customer service complaints. It was just a nightmare for a few months. But I was slowly actually learning it. And Gerard Gay, for whatever reason, after I told him how I was on the street and how Christ brought me, because I was fairly open about my Christian faith, brought me to this job, and how I didn't really want to quit on him because he's nice enough to hire me, they kind of kept me always one discipline away from being fired, and they never actually fired me. And then after 9 months, I figured out this job and was doing really good. And then after about a year, nursing opened up, like being a real nurse. Well, healthcare it is nursing of a sense, but becoming, a licensed nurse, licensed practical nurse. So anyways, when that came, I gave my notice. They actually threw a huge party for me. I got my first professional reference and into nursing. Now, nursing is where my ministry came into being. I always assumed it was going to be prison ministry. Kind of made sense, that'd be the fit. And in fact, I went to a prison fellowship meeting that they canceled without telling me, and I drove 2 hours to this darn thing. I wasn't very impressed that they never told me, so I wasn't too eager to volunteer with them anymore. And in fact, I phoned them to ask where they were, and they kind of says, oh, well, we canceled it. It's like, well, thanks. You never told me, and I told you guys I was coming. So I was praying because at this point I had a car, I had an apartment, things were going good. I was living with some Christian brothers. By now I was 25 years old, pretty well established in my church. And I did say, God gave me so much. God gave me so much. And Lord, I want to give something back to you. And I did get on the side of my bed and prayed. And this was just in my room by myself. And it was a beautiful room. For those of you who've been in Toronto, my house was right where my apartment was. Like, it was actually a house we were sharing with other people. I had a view of High Park. Like, it would be a very exclusive, expensive area today. And, for whatever reason, they gave this to us Christian guys really cheap. But, I prayed and said, Lord, I'd like to give something back to you now because I got all this. And at some point, I gave $30 to Campaign Life and never gave any thought to it. And what happens is sometimes you get put on these mailing lists without asking. And sometimes that's a pain, but sometimes it works out. I got this interim newspaper, which I never asked for, but they figure, well, you give to one guy, you're going to give to me if you send this to him. So, I opened this thing up, and it said, Sidewalk Counselors Desperately Wanted. Now, when I was in nursing, I had a teacher who had the audacity to tell the whole class, if you won't help with an abortion, you should get out of nursing. And I was pretty annoyed at that. Like, why does this baby killer think that they got the right to dictate that you got to kill babies? You get into nursing to heal. And so this is where I got exposed to this battle. And even back in the 90s, I was a minority guy. I actually, that's why I gave some money to Campaign Life. I went over there because I had to do legal and ethical. Now, when I graduated from nursing, I actually had 83%, so I had an A. It was a really good mark. The one class that I got a C, I got a 60 on the dot, was legal and ethical. And they told me I was too subjective, and I'll tell you why. And you tell me if this is subjective. This is how ridiculous it gets. I brought in a film from a former abortionist who became a Christian. His name was Dr. Nathanson. And he did an abortion on ultrasound, one of his last abortions. And it looked about as objective to me as it could get. Because he put what's called the suction machine, the Coretti, up the woman's vaginal canal and would cut the baby in pieces. And you could see the heart rate go from 120, normal fetal heart rate, to 200 as the baby was moving violently, and then it stopped. It died, and the heart monitor stopped. That is not an opinion, what you saw. You saw the death of someone. There's no ifs, ands, and buts. Now, in the Christian world, that's murder, and it should be murder, because that baby was made in God's image. And see, like, I had no respect for life back in those days when I was doing armed robberies and, trying to run buses into walls of police stations. But God changed me where I valued human life, even those little babies. And that bothered me. And so that's what I told the class, and that's what I showed the class. And I believe there's 36 students, 33 walked out. There was one, I remember, Caribbean woman who says, "Oh my Lord, this is murder." She was an apostolic Christian. Well, she sat there for it. And there was a couple others who sat there, and a whole bunch of young women, like in their 20s and whatnot, who called me a moonbat and an idiot. And, oh man, did I ever get abuse for that. And the teacher, who was an NDP, told us, if you want a caring and compassionate Ontario. Now, you guys know how caring and compassionate Alberta is with your wonderful Rachel Notley. Anyways, we're supposed to vote for compassionate society by bringing these radical pro-abortionists about. Well, I didn't see much compassion in that kid dying in that ultrasound. And they said, because I showed that to the class, that was subjective, and I got a C. So anyways, I was I was kind of proud of that C. Now, when I graduated, I saw this ad, Sidewalk Counselors Desperately Needed. Well, I cared enough about the unborn after that experience that, I thought it was going to be prison ministry, but I said, no, God, I could see you bringing me there. And so by now I was out of trouble for quite a few years. Had this stable nursing career, and I started volunteering at the abortion clinics. And I had no idea where this was going to take me. And my first day, I wasn't even that thrilled. Because, here I am, kind of a, handsome 26-year-old guy, hoping to meet some maybe new friends in pro-life. And the first people I meet is like this 60-year-old lady and this other lady whose name was Linda Gibbons, who eventually became my friend. Yeah, but they were like quite a bit older than me, and it didn't look like it was going to be much of a social scene. And then I thought, well, I'm not here for a social scene, even though that's what I kind of want. I'm here to save babies. So this isn't really about me. So I put aside my initial kind of like, this looks pretty boring stuff. And it didn't turn out to be boring at all. So at first we sat and, helped with some baby food and helped with some different things for mothers who chose life. And none of it looked all that interesting to a guy with my kind of interesting background, but I did it because this is for God, not so much for me. And then I went out sidewalk counseling, and that's where I found that I really did fit in this ministry. Now, there were some women going in to kill their babies, and I would share the love of Christ with them. And I remember one girl came out crying from the abortion clinic. Like, they like to tell you how wonderful choice it is. And some women, quite frankly, are hard and do it and don't seem to be bothered as far as I can tell, and that's a reality many pro-lifers don't want to face. But, some women are coerced into it, and they're crying, and they're really hurting. And so this one woman who was crying, they brought her into this taxi cab, and I gave her a flyer and said, if you need any healing or need any help, give us a call. And the abortionist actually punched me, this little female lady, her name was Maria Crisello, and says, get the F out of here, you moron. And then I told her, well, I'm just trying to help this lady. You just killed her baby and you hurt her. And then she just screamed at me. Like, these people, some of them are quite demon-possessed. And now, because of my rather tough background, like that scares off a lot of Christians, I actually found my fit. And so I actually gave up my nursing job, started working 1 day a week in nursing, and started doing this 5 days a week. And, before long, the NDP, being the lovers of democracy, new Democratic Party, well, they just couldn't tolerate people saving children. So they actually put out fake news that we were violent, which was garbage, and that we were harassing these women. Once again, garbage. We're offering alternatives and a morally cohesive point of view. The courts being what they are, they put down these injunctions. Well, I didn't even really plan it this way, but I decided to violate the injunction because, the scripture says, you have to obey God's law before man. Now, I've been law-abiding guy for all these, for a number of years now, 4.5, 5 years. And I had to make a decision now to break the law again. And this time it was right. And this time I have a very, very clear conscience. When you're like stealing and hurting people, that's all about you. This was about children. And scripture is clear. Rescue those who are being delivered towards death. Amen. Deliver those who are about to be slain. Proverbs 24:11. Yeah. And, the Ontario courts and the NDP said thou shalt not witness in front of abortion clinics anymore. Well, that's contrary to God's will, because they're committing murder. Christians are called to share the gospel. We're called to bring the gospel to humanitarian situations. So I had to obey God rather than the NDP. So now, when I ripped off those 16 cop cars, and I had this lengthy record, armed robbery, assault with weapons, petty theft, AWOL, because I broke out of one jail. All that long criminal history, what I got for breaking into those cop cars was 45 days, which is ridiculous. Really, they should have sent me for 5 years. Thankfully, they didn't but when you're getting that long, you don't need to be nice to inmates anymore in my world. You need to be nice to law-abiding citizens who pay taxes, who don't need their stuff stolen. But they don't think that way. Now, interestingly, when I walked into that injunction zone with Linda Gibbons and a Catholic school teacher, her name was Rosemary Connell, we stood on the sidewalk and prayed. That was our crime, praying on a sidewalk, and I held a little sign that said abortion kills children. We're very polite, very nonviolent. The police came, put handcuffs on us, put us in the back of the cars, took us off a public sidewalk. We weren't even on the abortionist property. We were on a public sidewalk. They brought, the NDP and its fanaticism, brought a special prosecutor, which they normally do like for Hells Angels or Al-Qaeda. They brought it for us. And they got me 6 months in jail for standing on that sidewalk. And I thought, the media is going to be outraged at this. Quite amazingly, the only media that covered it was the Pentecostal Testimony, I think, and LifeSite News. Actually, LifeSite didn't exist back then. The Intern newspaper, pro-life paper. The Toronto Star, which was so upset at that time about this homosexual pedophile whose name was Eli Langer, drawing pictures of boys being sexually abused, like pornographic pictures, and sticking them in public art galleries. They were talking about his loss of free speech because of this, and they were covering some protest at Queen's Park, which sounded like hundreds of people. In reality, it was about 20. Each one was a different group, so they said, Queer Nation, the Canadian Civil Liberties, all these groups. Well, there's like one person from each group. So that was how many people were really fighting for the rights for these hideous pictures to be in museums. Well, I thought, well, really the media is going to be really outraged about this because, this isn't even perverted. We're just standing on a sidewalk and getting 6 months. Eli never spent a day in jail. His pictures were seized, and that was allegedly an attack on his free speech. The media was dead silent. And that was when I learned just how homogenous Canada's media is. It is very anti-Christian. It's owned by a handful of people. And even though you think you got a diversity, because they have different names, Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, National Post, Edmonton Journal, Edmonton Sun, it's really just a handful of people, and they're all very pro-death. And that is very, very sad. And they tend to be very anti-Christian. Jadrinka comes from a communist country, and she says the media here is more homogenous than Pravda was in Russia. It's really that bad here. It's fake news. So anyways, I was sitting in jail for 6 months, but it was quite different because now I am really serving God, and I'm a nurse. And so all these inmates, it's like, what is this nurse doing here for 6 months? And I says, well, I prayed in front of an abortion clinic. And by now I also had some Bible college training from Toronto Baptist Seminary. I wound up Lutheran, but that's another story. The Anabaptists helped me do that. So I actually set up my own church. I had my own, service. I excommunicated one guy for smoking pot at my service. And he actually repented eventually. His name was Winston. And I did stay in touch with him for a couple of years after he got out of jail. He did have to get deported, probably rightfully so, drug dealer. But I stayed in touch with him. And I think God really changed his life. It was quite different being in there for serving God. And there was people like Huntley Street and Lorna Duick who took a real interest in what happened to me. And when I got out, I was pretty battle-hardened and determined. The day I got out is the day I went back to the abortion clinic picketing again. And over a period of 5 years, I wound up in there 20 times. And it was kind of interesting how that challenged pastors and churches, because they talk about taking a stand, but nobody wants to pay that kind of price. Eventually, it did cost me my nursing career, but I never really regretted it. I moved out to Regina. They actually paid $10,000 to get me there because they were so short of nurses. And then they paid about $1 million that went to the Supreme Court trying to get rid of me. And, they were just upset that I was holding these graphic abortion signs outside of the abortuary. And, I was a health district employee, and the abortuary is health district as well. And even though I was working with, old people in palliative care, they were saying that, I'm fighting with my employer, which in fact I was. And I said, well, yeah, it's nice that you're helping old people. I'm all for it, but you're killing children over here, and I can't be quiet about that. So I did lose my nursing career. Eventually, I was acquitted at the Supreme Court level. They appealed to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court refused to hear it. But by then, I was out of nursing so long, I never went back. And then also I started speaking on the homosexual issue. And that's one of the ways I got to know Pastor Art. Once again, it's quite yeah. And also how I got to know Jesse. I became very interested in Jesse because I lost my nursing career. And he lost his job as a bus driver. And I could actually relate to that for doing the right thing. And there's no question in my mind that what Jesse did was the right thing, saying I can't drive this pro-sodomite bus. Like, you hired me to drive a bus to take people around. And if they happen to be gay, straight, bisexual, furries, or whatever they want to be, I'll take them where they need to go. But when you're getting the rainbows on them, you're telling me to celebrate it. So that was the same thing with me. I was very, very concerned, and especially being a nurse. Like there's actually no one less homophobic than me. The homosexuals tend to be phobic of Bill Whatcott. I invite myself to their parades. When I was a nurse, and when I'm at their parades, I'm sharing the gospel, and they can't handle it. They're running around with pictures of Jesus on their crotch. Like, these parades are not as nice as people think they are. The media will show you, our prime minister, and he looks kind of tame, but they don't show you all the Leathermen and naked guys behind him, and many. It's a very spiritual thing, the homosexual parade. Many of them have spiritual messages, and they're all opposed to to Christianity. I saw FUCK, the Christian right. That's a sign that I saw in the Toronto parade. Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, making fun out of the sisters of, they're of perpetual help. It's a Catholic thing. And, you see some of them dressed up as nuns, but like a caricature of a nun. I saw other signs like the Christian right is neither, saying that we're not Christian and we're not right because we don't approve of sodomitic relationships. So it's amazing how these homosexuals can't leave Christianity alone. And there isn't a whole bunch of Christians being mean. The media will give that impression. But in reality, look at yourselves. Look at Christians here in Calgary. Most of us are scared of the agenda. Or if a homosexual does show up, by and large, many of us will welcome them to the church. I certainly would. I don't know very many Christians that really hate homosexuals, but we believe it's a sin. And we believe God has better for you. And, when I was a nurse, I looked after about 600 homosexuals over a 5-year period. A good chunk of my nursing was home care in Toronto, in the gay district. So I actually got a lot of experience, clinical expertise, I would even say, in that area. And, I well understand AIDS medications, I understand AIDS transmission. It isn't all religious opinion. When you look after hundreds of people over 5 years, and you're a nurse, you get a real understanding of AIDS and the gay lifestyle. And I can tell you, it is all related to sexual behavior. And it's really kind of nuts when you look at the Center for Disease Control, how they say that AIDS is coming from homophobia because gays aren't appreciating themselves because Christians aren't accepting them. It's like, what a load of crap. Just a complete load of crap. The reality is it's a debauched lifestyle. Many of these men are well educated. Many of them have post-secondary degrees. We've been propagandizing, I don't want to use the word education, but propagandizing on condoms for like 20 years. And still, in Toronto, 1 out of 4 gay men have HIV. Nationally, in large cities like Vancouver and Calgary, it's 1 out of 5. It's very, very clear that accepting this lifestyle, because Christians aren't saying much on it. Like, you look at the news, it's pro-gay. If you're a homosexual and you want a job in the government, it's a bonus. There's a very good possibility you'll get hired by a big bank or government because you're gay. The idea that they're not accepted is garbage. It's Christians that are being discriminated against. Jesse lost his job. I lost my job for being Christians. Chris Kempling, a very fine teacher, lost his job because he wrote an article in the Toronto Sun during his time off work saying it's not fair to 5-year-olds to promote the gay lifestyle to them. He didn't even mention a school. He just mentioned it's wrong to do this. And they fired him from his teaching career. So it's Christians that are facing the discrimination, and yet the HIV rate, thankfully, is way, way, way under 1%. Maybe some Christians have sinned and wound up with it, but very, very few. Now, if it was an acceptance issue, Christians should be wiped out right about now, and gays should be the most healthy group, and it isn't that way. So, I pointed out these inconsistencies. And then in Regina, there was a big push with a group called Queer City Cinema. They were starting to show films of children having sex with men and putting it in a positive light. So I started putting out flyers on that kind of thing. Then they were trying to promote it in the schools, and they have now. Here, the NDP does have it in Calgary schools. I don't think any Calgary school is safe for children anymore, which is really sad, at least publicly funded schools, and they're even starting to persecute private Christian schools. But I spoke out on this being promoted in schools, and I gave, based on my own clinical expertise, the facts, that if you engage in this type of behavior, you will face a very high risk of hepatitis, you will face a very high risk of cancer, anal cancer in particular for men, you will face HIV. Your life expectancy will go down by about 20 years. These are facts. These are not religious dogma or ideology, as they accuse me. And I even footnoted the facts. I even brought books to my tribunal. I wound up found guilty by the Saskatchewan Human Rights Tribunal. I was fined $17,500 and ordered to not speak on this anymore. And one of the bizarre things they said was, even if I spoke the truth, that is not a defense because I did it with a motivation of hatred. Now, how did they even know my motivation? I didn't tell them. I didn't tell them I hate you. I never said that to a gay guy in my life. I had a few of them say it to me, but I never said it to them. How did the Human Rights Tribunal know what my motives were? But they judged my motives, and they said that because of my motives, that even if I spoke the truth, it was for hatred, and therefore can't say it no more, and we'll eventually put you in jail and fine you again if you continue. Being a pretty stubborn guy, once again, it went about 24 hours from the time of the judgment being released to me being... I actually drove to Saskatoon and put out another 5,000 flyers on this issue with all the medical harms of homosexuality and the good news that God can redeem you. Anyways, that battle went to the Court of Appeal, and I actually won at the Court of Appeal level. And this shows you the problem with hate speech laws, just to give you guys a little bit of education here, because these laws will apply to you if you decide to speak the gospel. It is a very subjective thing. My lawyer didn't think I spoke hate speech. I didn't think so. Some gay guy thought I did, and some tribunal guy who was a lawyer thought I did. Now, at the Court of Queen's Bench, they thought I spoke hate speech. Now, three judges looked at it, all of them with either a bachelor or master's degrees in law, and they said I didn't. Then the Saskatchewan Court of Human Rights Tribunal appealed to the Supreme Court. So I wound up at the Supreme Court again. And they had 6 judges look at it and say I did commit hate speech. So now how can a reasonable person know what is hate speech and not when you got all these judges who can't? And unfortunately at the Supreme Court level, they once again said the truth was not a defense. So at that point I had nowhere else to go. And I lost that case, and that was like $400,000 or $500,000 in legal fees as well. But the day that I was found guilty of so-called hate speech was once again the day I went to the university and put out more flyers. So, you can lose in court. You'd like to say that God would give you the victory there. I wish he did, but he's smarter than I am. I think in some ways Canadians deserve this loss of freedom because we've done precious little to defend our religious liberty, and most Christians have chosen to be kind of busy with their life and not even know what was going on. So maybe God is removing some of his protection from us because it's not so comfortable. But anyways, at that case, it was not the end of the story. I'm still going, and quite amazingly, yeah, they took my house, they took my carpet cleaning job, homosexuals started attacking that one, they took my nursing career, but I'm still here, and I've never missed a meal. This past year, I got a new case going, because now that I'm not living for myself, I get concerned about issues. And I live in Vancouver, they had an election this past spring, and I didn't think I could vote for anyone because my Green guy was pro-gay and pro-abortion. My NDP guy's an out-and-out socialist, and I'm as conservative as they come, so I can't go there. And then the Liberal guy, he was good for nothing. So I really didn't think that I could vote for anyone, and I said, Lord, I still want to be involved in this election. So I actually started going through Vancouver ridings just to see who was running. And lo and behold, I found this guy who thinks he's a woman. His name is Ronan. Actually,
let me interject for Bill's case, though. He's done a lot that he hasn't mentioned.
We're also running out of time. We've got to be sensitive to that.
He just fast forward.
So much. Yeah, well, it is what it is, right? For my book, Jadrinka has 3 copies of my book for those who want to know more. I should have brought more, but I didn't. Sorry. So anyways, I found this transvestite running, and I'm very big on gender identity too. Like, God has made us male and female. It's not complicated. And nowadays, I'm talking to 18-year-olds who think there's 52 genders. Facebook thinks there's 52 genders, and that makes no sense. Like, it just makes no sense. And this is the financial district that Ronan was running in, like the heart of Vancouver. Very important riding, the most important riding. And I thought, well, they shouldn't vote for a dude that thinks he's a woman. And voting for the NDP is a bad idea anyways, as evidenced by Alberta's prosperity and loss of religious freedom, and how they found the time to send a special prosecutor to put me to jail for saving babies. This is the NDP. It's the party of fanatics. So anyways, I put out 1,500 flyers, which in this riding of hundreds of thousands of people is precious little. I had a budget of $60. I think I did a crowdfunding on Facebook, and someone sent me $60 for the flyers. And I just said, Ronan is a guy. And until he repents of his transvestitism, God doesn't want you to vote for him. And then I put some health effects, because most transvestites are into the homosexual lifestyle, so they're ravaged by AIDS. And then I said, God can change them. And God can change you too. And you can tell the NDP you're not going to vote for him and accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. It might be an offensive flyer to some. It was a very sensible flyer to me. So, I put this around the heart of Vancouver, which is ultra-liberal. I had homosexuals chasing me. I had women chasing me. I was in one apartment building. I snuck into the building. Like some guy opened up the door. And I go, "Oh, can you open the door?" He says, "Sure." And then I started at the front, at the top floor. I literally had 2 lesbians running down the hallway at me. And I'm in a little better shape now, but in the spring I was about 15 pounds heavier, and I tried to run. And these are like granola crunchers, so they know how to run. And, like a lot of these gays, they just work out, right? So they actually got me, each one by a side of my collar, and marched me out of their door with a bunch of F-bombs and threw me out the front of the building. And this is just for telling them a godly option of not voting for socialists that are gender confused. And I tried to preach to the 2 of them as they threw me out, letting them know that they could accept Christ. It might have worked out later on. It didn't work out at the time. So anyways, the United Church got hold of my flyer, and they put out this public proclamation that Bill Whatcott doesn't have the love of Christ because he's saying that homosexuality is a sin. And really, our church celebrates diversity, which is a cold word for homogeneity. You're just pro-gay. Really, if it was diversity, they'd accept my opinion too.
Yes.
But the only opinion they accept is a pro-homosexual one. So they're actually very non-diverse. They're very non-tolerant. And then, Ronan, the transvestite, he actually would have won. He actually would have won this. He was actually ahead in the polls. Keep in mind, there's hundreds of thousands of people. I have no capacity to reach any of them. I could just put out my 1,500 flyers. Now, the gays got my flyers all over Facebook, so they're actually proclaiming the gospel far and wide. God is using it. Hundreds and thousands of people are reading the gospel that I wrote that I could have never done. They got it on homosexual activist message boards. So now thousands of people are aware of me and my message that Ronan's a guy. All the media is calling him a woman. The liberals are calling him a woman, his competitor. The Greens are calling him a woman. The liberals are putting out press releases denouncing my flyer, even though he's their competitor. So interestingly, this is bringing a lot more awareness to my concern about transvestitism and gender confusion, and how God, has something better for us. Now Ronan has a little hissy fit. He's actually a little tyrant. He just hates free speech. He believes he has the right to run in a riding as a woman and no one question it. And he really believes that. He wanted me in jail. He ran down to the Vancouver Police Department, demanded that I get charged with a hate crime. He mentioned in the media he was holding emergency meetings over my flyer, canceling his election rallies, canceling them on the last week. I never told him to do any of this, by the way. He just chose to do this. And then he ran to BC's election. They were giving me threat letters that I'll be put in jail for a year and $10,000 fine if I don't go and collect all my flyers. I don't even know how to collect all my flyers. This is downtown. I gave them out days ago. I don't know where they are. And plus now they're all over Facebook, and the United Church has it up. So they're showing it more than I am.
Against them.
Yeah. So then he went to the Human Rights Tribunal, and they took the case, and I am being prosecuted. But on the last night of the election, another thing, Jadrinka called me. They were holding an anti-Bill Whatcott protest in downtown Vancouver, and 100 of these transvestites and NDPs were protesting. And I actually tried to get to the thing, because I thought, who better to address a rally if they're protesting me than me, get to hear me. And as I was